Good morning, good afternoon, depending on your occasion, and welcome to this webinar arranged jointly by AFRY Management Consulting, eBridge and Notes, where we're going to talk about, Nordic flexibility markets, both regards to practical experience, especially with a view to the ongoing Stockholm Flex project, but also with lessons learned from Germany and the new platform with Redispatch 2.0 and other experiences. We will have three presenters, and Espen, if you go to the next slide. Thank you. We'll have three presenters and one participant in the roundtable discussion after the presentations. So my name is Jet Lingberg. I'm heading AFRY's Energy Management Consulting activities in the Nordics, and I'm happy then to introduce our four participants. Espen Døvle, who's coming from AFRY Management Consulting. He joined AFRY just less than 1 year ago, but he has a long experience, like 10 years experience from the energy power sector, especially for Nord Pool, where he has worked on day-ahead intraday power markets, but also on digitalization of the power industry, agile methods, etc. Hallstein Hagen, who's joining us from Notes, is a senior consultant in Notes, and he has since 2016 been part of Nordic Energy's flexibility project that led to the establishment of Notes together with Nord Pool. Hallstein has a long experience delivering energy trading and risk management software to the energy sector, and is also then currently involved in the Stockholm Flex projects along with other Notes projects. Then we'll welcome Henning Schuster. He is the managing director of eBridge, a German consultancy within the energy business, where he is also heading the network activities both for distribution system operators and transmission system operators. In recent years, Henning has been instrumental in developing and implementing many of the pioneering mechanisms in the energy sector in Germany, such as the Redispatch 2.0, to which he will come back. And then finally, we're also very happy to welcome Bengt Johansson from Ellevio. He has a central role in Ellevio's participation in the Stockholm Flex project. Bengt has more than 35 years experience from the power sector, much from, senior management in Ellevio and other DSOs. He is also board member of the newly started EU DSO entity, which is the entity that now at this time gathers more than 900 DSOs across Europe. So before we start, Espen, if you go to the next slide, you will notice on the panel you have on your screen, there's a question tab. That is where you can actually on the way ask questions, write in questions, and we will try to reply to as many as we can by the end of the presentations. Otherwise, we'll have the information about the question and who's raised it, so we'll try to get back to as many as possible to the extent we're not able to answer them here in the webinar. Then the webinar pack, the slide pack, and also the recording will be made available to all of you as soon as they are ready. So, Espen, I think I'll just pass the word over to you, and to start the presentation, we're setting the scene, and much of the presentation will link up to a recent work we've done for Nordic energy research on exactly the design of local flexibility markets. So please, Espen.
Thank you, Kjetil. I'll just adjust my camera here. So I'm going to talk about flexibility markets, obviously, trying to set the scenes for the other presenters. So why are we even talking about flexibility and flexibility markets? What you see here is a slide with some key numbers. What we see is that the energy transition is expected to increase the need for grid investments. And we believe that utilizing the flexibility might reduce or delay some of it. If you look at the total and peak Nordic electricity demand, AFRY expected will grow by 2 to 2% and 3% per year until 2030. That is AFRY's projections in a central scenario. At the same time, we see that 20 gigawatt of new intermittent renewable capacity will be connected to the Nordic electricity grid by 2030. And what we see is that the electricity demand and the intermittent renewables, it will grow unevenly across the Nordic countries geographically, meaning that what we see is that a lot of renewables is being developed in the north, while a lot of the increase in demand is happening in the central areas, which is more in the south, and of course this further increased the congestion issues. If we look here at key investments driver in European DSO grids, and this is in Europe, we see that 50% of the driver for investments is happening because of the electrification and renewables. And when we talk about electrification, that could be, for instance, electrification of the car industry. If you look at the other parts here, we see modernization and resilience of the grid is expected to be driver. It's going to be 33%, while digitalization and others will stand for 17%. Obviously, this is Europe, so we can expect it to be a bit different in the Nordic countries and individually for each Nordic country. When we looked at Sweden and Denmark, around 50% of the driver would come from modernization and resilience of the grid. If you look at some expectations here from Euroelectric, they have predicted 16 billion euros investment in the power distribution grid in Sweden and over 6 billion in Denmark until 2030. At the same time, NDE has predicted a more than 13 billion euros investments in power distribution grid in Norway. So obviously, grid investments in the coming year will be expensive, and therefore we are talking about now how to utilize the potential of the flexibility that lies in the grid. So we have looked at some key drivers towards a successful market for local flexibility in the Nordics. And what we see here, as a baseline for this, we believe that there needs to be a proper regulatory framework as a basis for everything. Then obviously there needs to be a demand for local flexibility, and then obviously incentives for flexibility to provider to actually sell their flexibility to the DSOs and TSOs. And on top of this, there's need for a proper process and tools for flexibility procurement, and then eventually also market harmonization. So these are the key drivers, and towards this, what we see is that there's a lot of pilot and research and development projects happening, driving the development of this. So I will now go through the different aspects of this. And if you look to the regulatory framework first, what we have is obviously from EU, the Electricity Market Directive, which talks about utilization of flexibility. We also have national regulation and obviously Nordic cooperation, such as Flex4S initiative. And we believe regulatory framework needs to be planned in all these on all these levels. What we see as the main regulatory challenges is first of all, to remove barriers of entry and incentivize innovation in new technologies and independent aggregators. Secondly, create incentives for DSO to optimize the mix of grid investments and flexibility procurement. And lastly, a holistic framework to avoid local differences that hinder efficiency and competition. So first of all, is there demand for local flexibility? Obviously, we looked at the first slide where we saw the increase of renewables and demand and how that would be distributed unevenly, and also expected high investment costs in the coming 10 years. But we have also carried out interviews with some DSOs on behalf of Nordic Energy Research, which suggests that current need for flexibility is medium to low, and DSO may need stronger incentives to procure flexibility and higher certainty on the reliability of flex resources. So we had 11 respondents from the DSOs or across the Nordics. So if you look at the graph to the left here, it shows the current what they answered when they were asked about current need to procure distributed flexibility, and it's somewhere between medium to low, and this is today. And what they answered was the main barriers for procuring flexibility was economic incentives from the regulatory model and uncertainty about reliability of local flexibility resources. And thirdly here, availability of flexibility provided is in problematic areas. So that is today, but if you look, when we ask them about the future, so the interview expected more flexibility procurement in the future, reducing or postponing some share of network investment. So the left slide here shows the expect more flexibility procurement in 2030 than today. Some answer much larger than today, other larger than today, and the rest said hard to say or other. If you look at the graph chart to the right-hand side here, we see that network investment expected to reduce or postpone by procuring flexibility over the next 10 to 20 years. One participant answered a large share, while the others somewhere between some share and a small share. Two interviewed replied a very small share, while the rest replied hard to say. So of course there are some questions to be answered here, because this is probably why we are talking about flexibility markets. Could it actually postpone or reduce the need for investment in the grid and save cost? If we go on to incentives for flexibility providers, this is an important aspect, and it goes back to what the DSOs answered in the interviews about the reliability of available flexibility resources. So to have an efficient market, you need to attract providers of local flexibility, and they need reasonable economic incentives as well as practical solutions to do that. Some keywords here. Transparent price signals. So the market participants or the flexibility providers that would participate in such a market need to understand how the prices are set by the DSOs, and also how they could value their own flexibility assets. You need investability and then stability to attract new flexibility providers in the grid in the long term. You need to capture liquidity through competition, both on demand and the supply side. You need interoperability with other markets and services that could drive more liquidity in such a market. And by interoperability, it can mean many things, but typically in the systems, you can have systems talking to each other. You could have a connection to an intraday market or other types of markets, and have them working together to make life easier for the market participants. We also see here on the bottom here digitalization and automation for the flexibility providers. And obviously, automation is a key here. And to enable automation, you probably need APIs or other solutions to enable that in a market. You also need solutions for independent aggregators to utilize all the flexibility you might have in your grid. You should also incentivize innovation so that you get flexibility from new types of flexibility providers and technologies. And lastly here, unlock barriers to entry, and that obviously on the regulatory side, but also on the market side. It could be simple things like lowering the minimum size of a bid. Instead of say 0.1 megawatt, it could be 0.001, for instance. If we go to the next step here and talk about processes and tools for flexibility procurement. Now, a complete or a holistic market design for flexibility involves a range of services covering complex problems that need to be solved over time. And the reason why we're showing this is that a complete system is quite complex. And there are several tools and services that need to be in place. If you look at to the left-hand side here, you would have some services facing the market, such as a trading platform for them to trade on. And that's an interface, could be a user interface, or it could be APIs, or both. Exchange of data. So there's needs to exchange data. Could be, for instance, information about the assets, such as location and the type of assets, etc. You need systems for settlement and clearing. You need system for to solve nomination and balancing, either as part of a market platform, or it could be solved by other means or outside the market. Then on the right-hand side here, we say market harmonization. And I'll come back to that on the next slide, but obviously there are a lot of markets already existing, and additional markets on top of that, of course, increases the complexity for those participating in all the markets. So you have the wholesale day-ahead and intraday market, you have ancillary services, and you could, in the end, also have multiple flexibility markets. and eventually some degree of harmonization will probably benefit the market participants, and potentially also DSOs that are participating or are covering multiple areas in the grid. On the bottom here, we see DSOs/TSO tools. So there are tools there that is needed to actually operate or participate. Obviously, metering and monitoring, and of course the responsibility there depends on how the market design is structured. But somehow you need to have a way of monitoring if the flexibility provider is actually offering their flexibility or activating their flexibility. You might have TSO and DSO coordination. That is not given, but there might be a need for services or system that manages the coordination between TSOs and DSOs. And lastly, network forecasting and planning. So actually to predict the need for flexibility in real time, or in an hour from now, or in a day, or a week, or a year. I know the other presenters will also talk about this, so I'll leave it at that. And of course, this doesn't necessarily need to be a comprehensive list of systems and services, but just showing the complexity of it. Lastly, I did mention market harmonization. And in Europe today, we see numerous flexibility initiatives having been involved over recent years, driving innovation in the field, which we think is positive. Obviously, eventually some level of harmonization is, or not obviously, but some level of harmonization is probably needed. You see here on this map, you have some markets, you have nodes here. They are active in Sweden, Norway, Germany, UK, even Poland, Portugal, and Germany, with different projects. You have Coordinate in Sweden, you have Piccolo in UK, GoPax in the Netherlands, NERA in Germany, and you have 3 European projects: Interface, Sysflex, and OneNet. They are not all evolved around the market itself, but trying to answer different aspects and questions within the kind of the era of flexibility. Especially OneNet, you have an initiative. The Nordic part of this project is in the Nordics and Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, looking to see how flexibility market could be integrated with the intraday market. The reason there's a lot of other blue spots here for these European projects. Not all of that is markets, but rather different initiatives around it. Then you have FlexNess in Finland, and you also have other smaller pilots, such as a small pilot in Denmark. Now, the good things with this, as I said, is you get a lot of innovation in the field, but obviously you risk facing some problems if you have too many markets in the end. So where the market participant might need to choose between markets. So some degree of harmonization is needed. And harmonization could also be on type of products, how you would register your assets, your flexibility assets. These things are not set in stone, and innovation will eventually drive the development in this field. I believe that was all we wanted to say before we hand it over to our other presenters.
Thank you, Espen. And as you just showed us, Nodes has a number of pilot projects and platforms up and testing and running across Europe. So we now give the word to Hallstein to give us more insight in Nodes experiences from different markets. Please, Hallstein.
Thank you very much, Kjetil, and thanks for this opportunity to participate in this webinar. I'm just going to see that I get my screen to work. Yeah. So the practical examples, how does it work? And I'll going to give you an insight into the work that we've been doing for the past years. Nodes is facilitating the trading of flexibility between grid operators and flexibility providers. With grid operators, I mean local DSOs, regional DSOs, or indeed also TSOs. The framework, or the reason we're doing this is that through the clean energy package, we see that the role of the DNOs are changing to the role of the DSO, from a network operator to a system operator. And in particular, they will then need the procurement of auxiliary services and flexibility. And when they do, there is a sentiment that they should treat generation, demand side response, and storage equally. There should also be a permission of aggregation, and it should all be based on market prices. And we have created this picture of the flexibility value chain, the digital flexibility value chain. The reason the digital is in brackets is that although all the operations that we have developed is available via the API, it can also be performed manually. So if you go from the asset owner, we see that the asset owner have some sort of control technology that enables them to remotely dispatch a delivery of flexibility. So that dispatch of flexibility could either be demand turn down, it could be production turn down or production turn up, or a combination of these things. Through this control technology and this technical aggregation, we see that we will have a commercial aggregation of resources and somebody that is offering this flexibility at a price to the grid operators. And the grid operators then will signal their need and hence their willingness to buy flexibility. So we see three distinguished roles here. We see the role of a seller to present the flexibility and to deliver it. We see the role of a marketplace, and we see the role of the buyer. In today's flexibility markets operated by the TSOs, the role of the buyer and the marketplace has been combined into one system. And I'll come back to that on a later slide. Flexibility comes in different shapes. And we are talking about a lot about tariffs when we start talking about releasing flexibility into the system. So you will have tariffs that are geared to release implicit flexibility. And you will also have tariffs that are geared towards explicit flexibility, mainly in form of interruptible tariffs or various connection schemes, and that allow the DSO to disconnect a load when they need. In praxis, they actually are paying for the flexibility up front, and activation of the flexibility will then be, in many times, regarded as zero. Then we have the two different types of flexibility that we have been trialing in our projects. One is long flex, which is availability contract. That means reservation of flexibility for a future activation. And then we have the short flex product, that is an activation of flexibility in the market where you only get remunerated for the activation. Our experiences, and I often talk about the activation of flexible assets in the medium and low voltage grid, but I also talk a lot about TSO, DSO coordination when I give these presentations. And my experiences today and what I have with me in the presentation is centered around the work that we've done in Nordflex, a project which is financed by Enova or funded by Enova in Norway, and where Agder Energy, Glitre, Statnett, and Nodes are delivering the project. This is probably the project that has the highest degree of automation amongst the projects that we are running. And we're looking at various use cases on the medium to low voltage grid. Then we have Stockholm Flex, which has been mentioned earlier. This is a project which is run by Ellevio, Svenska Kraftnät, and Vattenfall. And it's very special because it's a regional market and it has been set up to allow flexibility to be bought in the neighboring grid. In the UK, with Western Power Distribution, we have been trialing a close to real-time market for activation of flexibility. And we also intended to put in place an automatic rebalancing service in the intraday market to balance out the imbalance that occurred as a result of a flexibility transaction. That turned out not to be so popular with the balance responsible parties. They rather control that themselves. And hence we have developed an information service allowing the balance responsible parties to be notified of the transactions that is happening, the imbalances that might occur as transactions is happening on nodes. And finally, I'd like to mention Smart Senja, where we're actually on a very beautiful island, where the problem is really automation or digitalization and electrification of the fishing industry has led to constraints and issues with their radial grid. And we are testing there with AFRY and many other partners on how flexibility can be used to help that situation. Key in all these discussions when we talk about flexibility and the DSO coordination is transparency. Transparency between the grid operators so that they know what has been planned to get activated in the future. And also transparency among prices and the fact that the cheapest flexibility will always be dispatched so that the society knows that the grid is spending their money wisely. A lot of the needs of the grid and also indeed the wishes of the sellers is set to optimize their situation. And the complexity of optimizing the grid on the lower levels is not only put in place by the calculation itself, but the complexity of optimization increases when you look at the different parties that are doing the optimization. If you are a grid company, you will optimize with the aim of running the grid as efficient as possible and to make sure that the lights is on. But if you're optimizing from an asset owner perspective, you might be focusing on return on your investment, and that might be different from an industry flexibility provider where they will optimize for their industrial process themselves and not necessary for providing flexibility to the grid. And finally, if you are a private or dealing with domestic users, they might more than anything else optimize on comfort rather than on selling flexibility. So we need a common language in order for each of these optimization calculations to be able to run independent of each other. And that common language is location, price, and volume or quantity. If we have the common language centered around bids in the market, then we take away the complexity of trying to optimize the whole system, and we allow both sellers and buyers to show their interest in the market. And indeed, the role for nodes as a market operator becomes a traditional role of a market, a place where the buyers and sellers can meet, where the prices can be formed based on supply and demand. For that purpose, we launched a bottom-up integrated market design back in November 2018, and we've been working in our projects to try to demonstrate the various parts of this market design. Core in the market design is that flexibility is offered bottom-up and bought top-down. The process really starts with the DSO signaling to the market or establishing a market and signaling to the market that they have some congestion areas. By signaling to the market, it allows the sellers to register assets with the DSO to be ready to trade. And these assets can, of course, be behind the meter assets. The grid company, on the other hand, will create these grid nodes or congestion zones in nodes. And one way of doing that is using the different voltage levels in the grid, as this example from Nordflex is showing. There is the pink grid node here is called Arendal Sentralnettspunkt. It's actually the point where this part of the grid reaches the transmission grid. Underneath there are several zones on the or substations on the 132 to 22 kV, and finally it's the really low voltage substations that goes down to the customer itself. By creating these zones, we automatically have a corresponding order book. It means that all it takes to get going, so to speak, is that we establish these zones and we authorize the assets to participate in the market. And the authorization process is very simple. It's basically the DSO will assign the asset to the correct lowest grid node or congestion zone. That provides a level playing field and transparency, because all different flexibility, being production, being storage, being demand response or consumption, can compete on a level playing field. And it gives the buyer a possibility to either drill down in the flexibility offered or indeed aggregate up to a larger bid. So when the circle says Arendal Sentralnettspunkt, that will comprise all the flexibility underneath these points. It's automatically offered at any level above or any level below this point. As you can see from the small picture where it says how many megawatt would you like to upregulate. And the merit order stack will then start by buying the cheapest flexibility, and then finally get to the flexibility offered under Engene, which happens to be the most expensive one in this stack, and it will only deliver what is rest in what the DSO wants to buy. In the Nordflex project, and a similar function is also being tested in the Stockholm Flex project, we are doing a coordination based on a SQL access to demand response services. And the way we do that is that we allow the DSO locally to trade up until gate closure for the nodes market, which in the Nordflex is 2 hours before the ISP close or delivery. And after that, we will aggregate the flexibility and present that to the MFRR market. In Stockholm Flex, we will do a straight pass-through of any orders that originates from a market participant that has already been approved by the TSO. But in Nordflex, it is nodes, and the nodes value chain or digital chain that has been approved, so we can aggregate all the orders up to MFRR. It does represent some challenges because the nodes resolution in Nordflex is 1 kilowatt, so a kilowatt can be traded, whereas the resolution in the MFRR in Norway it's normally 10 to 5 megawatts, but we are running a special regime allowing us to aggregate 1 megawatt blocks into MFRR. It allows for value stacking for the sellers because they can participate in long flex season contracts and get remunerated for their availability, long flex weekly contracts, and indeed the short flex contracts. I did not mention, but we also have the possibility of importing other contracts into the long flex part of the system, which means that bilateral contracts can be managed through the nodes market, and you will see the activation price for any of your contracts in the short flex market, and hence make sure that you only activate the cheapest flexibility. If we draw this a little bit further, we have the potential for improvement if all parties were accessing the same order books. Then we could have both TSOs, regional DSOs and local DSOs accessing the same flexibility, and we get a true market-based coordination, because we could then inform the grid at any level of what transactions had taken place and in which direction for which volume each of the congestion areas is moving. Another important role of us in nodes is to provide this transparency to the market, and we are publishing our market data or average data from the market on our website. It is interesting to see that by publishing this, potential flexibility service providers call us up and ask how they can become part of this market. If we look at some of the data that has come out of the projects, we see that the biggest volume that has been traded has been from the Stockholm Flex project. And it's naturally because the bottleneck in this project is really on the connection between the regional DSOs and the TSO. So more than 2,200 megawatt times an hour has been transacted, and the majority of that has been transacted in what the Swedes call TSO temporary subscription. And by integrating this TSO temporary subscription with the nodes market, we are able to show when this type of instrument is available to the DSO, and if it's not available, then the next best is to buy flexibility, which has also happened. In the Intraflex market, that's been run in 2 phases so far. More than 800 megawatt hours have been traded and more than 1,400 trades. And the price range is also there relatively low, I would say. But here the DSO has been very clear up front with their buying strategy. So they start by posting their need in form of a volume at the price of £1. And you can see from the stats that some flexibility providers in the project actually sold their flexibility at £1, and I think that might be down to a finger trouble on the keyboard. But anyway, the DSO there increases the price they're willing to pay as they get closer to the operating hour. And we can also see that the different flexibility providers get into some sort of price competition. And in Nordflex, we have also traded more than 100 megawatt hours and quite a few trades. And you would probably notice that when the price range is from 100 to 30,000 Norwegian kroner, you're wondering what took place. And what happens was that 30,000 Norwegian kroner is around 3,000 euros, for your information. And what happened is that we simulated a disaster week where the grid actually wanted to buy all flexibility available, and hence put the price up to where they have to pay if they disconnect subscribers. What that learned us is that you cannot, as a buyer, expect to get more flexibility than you're willing to sow, because if the flexibility assets are not ready, price doesn't really matter. It takes too long time to get it online, and hence it's an important task for the DSO to start buying flexibility even if they don't need it, because then it's ready for the day when you need it. So in many respects, nodes as a technology has reached a stage of TRL level 8 or 9 maybe, where we are doing transactions. All these numbers that you saw on the previous slides has been settled by nodes in our settlement service and verified in the various flexibility registers for delivery. So we actually have the possibility now to facilitate so that you can innovate, whether you are a flex provider that needs to develop your systems to interact with this type of marketplace, or you are a grid company that needs to interact with it. And I have an example here from the Nordflex project where Agder Energy is going through this transition, the change mindset, as I say. Today's grid operation is very much like driving a train. You either speed up, i.e. build a grid, or you slow down, i.e. come with various types of interruptible tariffs or connection agreements. And in the future, you need to be able to fly an airplane and constantly correct in order to keep in balance. And the reason this is a jazz Gripen on this slide is that plane cannot fly without computer systems. And I also think that you need computer systems in order to operate the grid of the future. So Agder Energy has developed the grid tools. It allows them to understand through the digital twin and model their use cases to be able to predict where they will get a problem, how big this problem is, and for how long the problem exists. Through the system, they are able to inform the market, i.e. by publishing grid nodes from their digital twin. They are able to signal the market by posting buy orders on the market, and they can evaluate available sell orders from the market in order to optimize their grid, and when they're happy with what they want to do, by the activation in the short flex. So on this screen here, it's the main screen of the grid tools. You can zoom in on any of the bottlenecks. It will show you how much flexibility or how much load that bottleneck is having at the moment. And it will allow to, based on the historical measures for that grid load, produce a forecast for the next 24 hours, with also the possibility to simulate what would happen if they bought flexibility. And the sum of flexibility available in the market is shown on the same screen. But we have not only developed a technical system, we have also developed a rule book. And the nodes rule book is actually a framework for the buyers and sellers to reserve flexibility, activate, automate this transaction, and send trade signals for activation. And we validate delivery and settle the transaction on behalf of the buyers and the sellers. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Hallstein. And we now introduce the third speaker, Henning Schuster from eBridge. I will talk about how we manage very high congestion costs in Germany with the new Redispatch 2.0 platform and other experience. So please, Henning.
Yes, thank you very much, Kjetil, and a very warm welcome from my side from Bonn, from Germany. So, and I'm really happy to present to you the German approach towards the flexibility, especially for congestion management, and how it solves the one or the other issue Hallstein and Espen just raised. And I think in the beginning you will think, oh, this is the total opposite from what Hallstein just presented to you. But I think in the end it becomes clear that what the German the bylaw, how to say, enables a lot of future pathways and solve plenty of DSO internal challenges, practical challenges to be flexible, to use the tools, just as Hallstein said. So what is the situation in Germany? Well, the energy transition is in full swing. You can say we have gigawatts of installed capacity of renewable energy sources, wind power as well as solar power. And the solar power, we have a boom at the moment of large-scale solar power farms popping up everywhere in a short period of time. And as you can think, the network is simply not able to follow this development with this speed. We have plenty of congestions all over Germany and extremely high costs for congestion management, which sum up to 1.5 billion euro per year, year after year, only for congestion. And a very large part of these costs at the moment are from the transmission system congestion management, and especially in this part due to the fact that transmission system operator can only use a very small amount of the whole flexibility available in the energy system for the congestion management, so that it is ineffective and very costly. So what was the answer of the German government? It was a new law, and the introduction of, Kjetil just mentioned it, the Redispatch 2.0. The approach was to extend the range of flexibility available for congestion management, and in a first step focusing on the generator side, due to the fact that most of the congestions are driven by the infeed of renewable energy sources on a large scale. So the German Bundestag passed a law, NABEC 2.0 is the name, in 2019 in April, and this includes a new instrument for managing network congestion, this Redispatch. So Redispatch is a measure which is already in place, and as you can see on the picture here, the idea is that if a network operator has a prognosis about the congestion, for example, they had, and can locate this congestion, he is able to adjust the schedules after the dispatch of the market optimization of the generators. He redispatches the schedule by reducing the infeed before and increasing the infeed of a generator after the congestion, so that the congestion is solved and the balance is still given. And with this, and due to the fact of the energy transition, that the conventional power plants are reducing in number, there was this extension to storage facilities, RES generators, and also CHP plants. And this is new in this Redispatch 2.0, that these facilities, which are mainly in the distribution networks in Germany, can be taken into account in this schedule-based management of congestions. And this, on the right side, you can see, increases the numbers participating in this regime from 80 today up to 80,000 from the beginning. And this was a magical date, the 1st of October 2021, so just 2 weeks ago. This new regime went into go live, but the go live was a very small go live. It was not in its full beauty. I will come back to it later. But what we can see at the moment in Germany is that the congestion management and this redispatch measure is not only for TSOs anymore, but in the distribution network, the flexibility is also needed to very large amount. So far, the distribution system operator only used real-time measures, so reducing the infeed of RES by pushing a button. And as you can imagine, this is not the way it should be when it comes to reserve power balancing. So this new law, Redispatch 2.0, has to be implemented, and it gives a new opportunity for the DSOs. And to highlight this, I brought an example of a DSO in Germany. It's EDIS is the name, and the area of supply is shown in this map. You can see Berlin. Around of Berlin is the grid area of EDIS up to the Baltic Sea. And here you have 2.3 gigawatt of maximum load overall, and already an installed capacity of 11 gigawatt of RES. So at the moment, the network operators are heavily involved in the day-to-day operation. And as you can see on the left side, we have RES to load ratios, which were up to 100 or above 100. So 100 times more installed capacity of RES compared to the load in this region. And the topic at the moment, which we are struggling with and having a lot of discussions, is that especially due to these PV power plants, we have real connection requests of generators in this region of 60 gigawatt. So it's 30 times more, and this is just one example. So the use of flexibility is necessary for the DSOs in Germany, and it goes on every voltage level. And Espen just raised the question in the beginning that we should compare the investments in grid to the use of flexibility. And when you see situations like here, and it was not the same case 5 or 10 years ago, it was with a dynamic speed of sound, suddenly the situation was there. There is not the question either or. You have to use the flexibility because it's simply not feasible to rebuild or reinforce the network in this short period of time. So in this, to implement this Redispatch 2.0, the last 1.5 years were pretty stressful for all network operators and all market participants in Germany. Since this new regime, when you're taking into account more than 80,000 generators and 900 network operators, has to be managed in a way. And all this question Hallstein just asked about the rules, about the TSO, DSO coordination. How do you do it? In a way, had to be developed. This is on the left side, the framework, and this was BDW, so a group of all companies taking part in the energy system. And then the Bundesnetzagentur and the regulatory authority had to accept or determine these rules, of course. So they played also an important role. And there was a question: how should this data, when you send around this schedule every 15 minutes, and between the network operators you have a high amount of data exchange, and also between the network operators and the market participants, how do you manage it in a secure manner? Because these are sensitive data with a high standard of security. This is not a day-to-day data you have to exchange, and therefore a project called Connect Plus was implemented, and we as eBitch were the project manager of this. And then every DSO and every TSO had its own implementation project. We as eBitch were helping plenty of DSO, among others the E.ON group with the 10 biggest DSOs in Germany. And I will show you, they had to be flex ready in a very short period of time and implement new processes, which then enables in the long run the ideas or the use of nodes, for example. And then there were also requirements for the generators and operation managers, because they have to deliver the data. And when you ask about the incentive to take part at this, so the German way was to make it by law. They have to send the data, so to say. And this, of course, was stressful also for the operation managers. And last but not least, the development of IT systems. And you have all your experience with IT implementation projects, had to be ready in a very, very, very short period of time, because when it starts in 2019, it was not clear how the process is going on. It worked out in parallel, and in parallel, the IT system had to be developed to have a go live in the 1st of October 2021. So in the end, this was a massive challenge, but it was a huge digitalization project for all network operators in Germany, and had a lot of benefits which can be used for the future and to be ready for the energy transition. Some words, well, this was too quick. Some words about Connect Plus. Connect Plus was a project, and the shareholders of this project are the network operators. So it was purely cost-based, and the costs were paid over the network tariffs, and there's no company idea behind it, but it was only the idea to give the data infrastructure for the use of flexibility. And this joint cooperation nationwide across all network levels, and this was a uniform interface for the data exchange between network operators between themselves, and also with the market participants. And then it was a single point of contact, which is really, really helpful and streamlined all the idea. And since it was founded and managed by the network operators, they can also ensure that the security is as much as it should be. And this can be used by everyone, and this is the infrastructure needed for the connection. So, and we can see this as a lesson learned also, to make this as a standard for the interconnection. It enables plenty of new use cases and business cases. And very challenging especially for the DSOs, because plenty of these functions, new processes, and IT system were new to be implemented in a very short period of time, but it had to be done to be flex ready. So what are the functions? The DSO had to implement a function how to forecast and validate, forecast about the in-feed of generators, especially of RES, but also of CHP. The DSO have to analyze their grid, and not only in real time, but taking into or considering the forecast and the planning data of generators. They have to analyze the grid state, for example, day ahead. And this is the third point, dimensioning the redispatch. And this means to optimize the use of flexibilities which are available. And then this step, the redispatch dimensioning, has to be taken into account technical constraints of the network, the costs, and this is the next slide, also the measures taken by other network operators. This is the way of the DSO coordination here. And then ex ante, it has to be an energetic compensation had to be performed. So the procurement of energy, for example, on the energy exchange, to balance the measures. For those who have measures, who have congestions, they have to ensure that the measures are balanced. And then it's a bit special, but when it comes to the real-time conventional power plants and CHP, it's like Hallstein just showed. They are in control of their generators, but the control of the renewable energy sources is directly done by the network operator to ensure that these measures are taken into account. This is a bit special. Then afterwards, you have new processes of balancing and accounting, and as you can imagine, a lot of data exchange via Connect Plus and IT communication. So these were projects where all these functions were implemented within 1 year, and it's still going on. And we often have the discussion, okay, was it worth it to implement this function? Also, when, for example, today my network has no congestions, you can see that this is the case, because plenty of those who said, okay, I have no congestions, this is Captain Future for me. Captain Future is coming faster than you think, because this enables to be future ready. Not only for generation, but also for load. But the driver here was the generation side. And how is the DSO coordination implemented? Well, it has to be ensured that we have a secure network operation in every second, and also make use of possible efficiencies. And there, in a nutshell, and also looking at the time, because we also want to discuss this in a round table. It's a cycle running every 15 minutes, where in the beginning the DSO creates a forecast of the generation of the RES, first step. Then the operation managers of RES make a correction of this operation plan, and with this forecast, DSO calculate the optimal use of flexibility if there are any congestions, and the measures are adjustment of the planned schedule. And this information is sent to all other network operators. And what is also be sent is if there are any limits for others to use the flexibility which is directly connected in the network. And then the bottom-up approach, the DSO sees the measures of all DSOs, and then they can be taken into account in the load flows simulation, and then the flexibility use of the DSO can be optimized, and this then will be sent also to all other market participants and network operators, and then this is going on every 15 minutes. So in fact, it goes in parallel, but the idea is a bottom-up approach of the DSO coordination. And of course, this is for congestion management, and due to market activity or to reserve power activity, the schedules can change, of course, and this will be the information sent in real time to those via connections. And of course, for the DSO, we have in the heart of the DSO new functions to be implemented, and of course, this requires high automatization and also good digital databases of the network. And then there's one connection to Connect Plus, where all the TSOs, neighboring DSOs, and operation managers of the renewable energy sources be taken into account, and the direct control from the control center to the generators, and then the market communication is done via different passes for the accounting and billing. So the lesson learned, the best practice, what we saw in the last 1.5 years is that the process, of course, can only be implemented with a high degree of automation, and this was far away from the real world, and here and then we had to implement a workaround, of course. Then the high degree of automation requires sufficient digital databases. This is the key for any of these functions. And also to acquire this, what we saw is that cooperation projects of several network operators have been very, very successful. With eBridge, we managed, for example, one project in Bavaria with 57 participants and 57 DSOs joining together, buying one IT system and using this on a mandate basis, and this runs really, really well. And this comes along with the right side, that several DSOs did a BPO, a business process outsourcing, to reduce cost and complexity. And many DSOs did, because this was a step to this complexity Hallstein just mentioned. And the IT systems were implemented outside of the operation and control center. That this was the day ahead, and forecast business was not on the same level as the real-time network operation, and software as a service were really favored in many cases. So this was the Redispatch 2.0 level, and it's important to see what comes next, or what is enabled by this. And the idea of nodes to also not only take into account mandatory cost-based offers of flexibility, but voluntary market-based offers for load, for example. This is also an idea we as eBridge are pushing, and the Germans were really, really cautious about this use due to the fears of ink-deck gaming. So to use the market power of these sellers. But there is a new law and a new approach, and what is discussed at the moment to use kind of a hybrid model, using the infrastructure of Redispatch 2.0 and including voluntary market-based offers, so that the DSO can decide, do we use the cost base as a fallback or the market-based voluntary offers, and this helps to make it to make a limit also for the prices. And then, last but not least, on the right side, it's the integration of immobility, which is also coming with a high speed to Germany. And there we had a discussion in last year that DSO or the network operators wanted to directly control the BEVs in case of local congestion, the local network, and this was withdrawn by the Minister of Economy in person. And he said, no, this is the direct control. It's not the idea of the future. It has to be on a charging plan basis. And here, several projects at the moment are aiming to use also the same infrastructure, so that VW, Mercedes, or BMW is sending the charging plans via Connect Plus to the DSO. He checks if it's fine on a local level, and or reject it if it has congestions. and to avoid the local congestions. And this can also be combined with, for example, time variable network tariffs to relieve higher voltage levels. So you can see the German status quo has not many ideas of a market, flexibility market, but it enables these market-based ideas and started with enabling the DSOs to be flex ready and to optimize the grid optimization. Yes, so this was my input for the discussion, and I'm really looking forward for your reflection.
Thanks a lot, Henning. And I see we're running a bit behind schedule, so I suggest we go directly to the roundtable discussion. We have a few questions that come up in the chat during the presentation as well. We'll definitely get back to you who have asked questions on replies on those. So I'll invite everyone, and including Bengt Johansson, who is now joining in from Ellevio. And Bengt, we heard about different, perspectives and experiences from Nodes and from Germany. But from a DSO or Ellevio perspective, and from the experience you have with your ongoing process, what do you see as the main benefits of local flexibility markets?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for being invited to this webinar. For us, we see the opportunity to optimize our costs, or basically the cost for our end consumers in the end, by optimizing subscriptions, bilateral agreements with the flex. We also see when the flexibility markets become more mature and liquid, we believe that also will help us to manage new connections in a much larger or easier way, while bridging over until new network is built up. But wherever we might have bottlenecks. In Stockholm area, as mentioned before, it's basically on the national grid, and therefore it has been the more focus on the regional markets rather than local within our networks. So yes, it's a good opportunity, but there are a journey to be made, both for us as a company, going from a static point of view on our network to become dynamic, and as Hallstein also said, sitting in the JAS plane instead of driving the train.
Right. So you're not least pointing to the, the cost implications, of course, of seen from the DSO side. And Henning, you said one of the driving forces behind the Redispatch 2.0 is the very high increase in congestion costs in Germany. But have you had any experience in Germany? Would Redispatch 2.0 actually contribute to considerably lower congestion costs or other benefits?
Well, yeah, this is a question we are all asking at the moment, Katie. So was it worth it? Because as you can see, we have the implementation project of E.ON is around, I don't know, 50 million, and in some we have 150 million investment costs in digitalization of the DSO. So is it worth it? Of course, it is in the long run. And if you reduce the cost for congestion management by 10%, these 150 million, and this is I think likely to reach, then you have it was worth within 1 year. But beside this, I think it's the question is not only is it a good idea or should we do something else? It was a must to handle this energy transition in a way. So the network had to be digitalized, and so the way was to make it by law. Is this the right way? Are these the right incentives? I don't know. This can be discussed, but in effect, it was reached a lot to make the processes and the interaction between the market participants able. And I think this has to be done in the energy transition.
Right. Hallstein, you showed some real data from some of the nodes pilots around in Europe in a presentation, even though still so far, the volumes involved are reasonably small. What would be your, say, wider basis experience of benefits from these kind of markets?
Well, I think what is really new here is that the problems are moving from the transmission grid and down in the grid. So we come to situations where tackling the problems with the same tools is not going to cut it. And we've seen example on that from the UK, where grid operational cost of the national grid increased dramatically during lockdown. And we will see many systems here, and these problems will become more and more local. I think the reason the volumes are low on a regional level, specifically in the Nordflex project, is because the regional level is already operating within the MFRR market itself. So you know, it's a matter of showing the integration part of the nodes market model will actually get the true value of flexibility visible.
Thank you, Hallstein. And after the presentations, which has been, I mean, a mix of both, say, the principle, the market design issues, and also the practical solutions. Espen, given your work on your contribution to, say, overall market design issues, how do you see them, say, the most important market design issues for succeeding with the local flexibility markets? Because we're moving for something which is well established with TSO transmission level flexibility or ancillary services markets, and to a completely different level.
Oh, well, there were a lot of challenges that need to be solved. I think we talked about it already. I think the TSO DSO coordination is, I guess, one of the questions that we think would be needed to be further analyzed and understood. At what level should there be coordination and how it should be done? We see different solutions across Europe in the different initiatives we have there. So I guess there's some, I know both Hallstein and Henning did present their view on the TSO DSO coordination. Maybe you have some thoughts to that, how that would evolve over time.
Please, Hallstein.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether I understood the question, but if you talked about how the coordination between the DSO and TSO can be evolved over time, I think the best contribution that we can contribute with our market design is that when the flexibility has been offered through the nodes marketplace, the grid operators can decide where they want to stand when they buy that flexibility. There is often a discussion which says, should the congestion zones be fixed, or should they be variable? Should they be dynamic even? And it really depends, because if you look at flexibility from the buyer's point of view, the value of that flexibility is higher the closer it is to the problem. And in many cases, you cannot make use of flexibility if it's not south of your problem, so to speak. But on the other hand, if the problem is so specific and the assets few where you are trying to solve the problem, then the sellers of the flexibility is actually running a delivery risk by only having one or two assets in the portfolio. So both sides of the coin is equally important. And when you come to the delivery risk of the sellers, is when you get very close to the next step, which is actually a switch in our platform. Should also the sellers of flexibility be allowed to buy flexibility in the market in order to reposition their delivery risk? And we think yes, and we think that is a natural next step in our trials, that we actually start trialing for the flexibility providers to be able to buy flexibility. And by doing so, we think liquidity also will increase.
Right, and that sort of leads us on also to, I mean, one thing is the market design issues, is also the practical challenges we're seeing when we're trying to impose a new market design, new model. So Bengt, you have first-hand experience now from the Stockholm Flex project. What would be the most, say, challenging or important practical issues?
One of the absolutely most challenging parts is, of course, the recruitment of flexibility resources. In order to, it's quite a long process for most of the customers today to really understand their own consumption and how can they adjust it, and what implication might that have on their business operations or real estate or comfort, whatever it might be. So here we have aggregators that are very valuable for us to help us with this. Another issue that is a very practical one is how to get access to meter values, because in Stockholm Flex we have a regional market. It means that the resources might be on the local grid with another operator than Vattenfall Eldistribution or Ellevio. And then we need to have power of alternative, or rather we need that anyway, so that we can use the meter values from the customers. And that process is still quite administrative heavy, and there are need for improvement in that area. And I think that is relevant for many things on the energy market within Sweden.
Right. Henning, in light of Redispatch 2.0, what would you say are the most important, say, practical issues?
Yes, it was really nice that you don't ask me about the market design, because actually this is not market design, but a purely mandatory cost-based regime. And I think the challenge was the same as Bengt said. It's a market participant side, so that they have to be clear about their schedules, about the databases, the registration, which was also done by law. They have to be registered there. These were really challenging issues, and of course, bringing the network operators to a flex-ready status. This is a big project for every DSO, making the next step to the airplane pilot. And then the interconnection and data exchange, actually that wasn't that big issue. This was one of the first things which worked in real time, but it were the market participant and the internal projects of the DSO to be flexible. And we learned a lot. We had a really high learning curve in this project.
Thank you, Henning. I see we are approaching the end of the scheduled time for the webinar, so with full respect of everyone's time, I would like to thank you all for your presentations, for your contribution, and not least all attendees for attending this webinar. As I said, the presentation and also recording will be made available to all of you as soon as they are available. We have, we'll probably add on a few more emails. If there are any follow-up questions on any of the participants here, you will have the contact information. And please also follow up on AFRY Management Consulting's website. We have regular webinars on different energy topics that may be of interest to you. So again, thank you all for your contributions, and I wish you a nice rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.